Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. Today I want to talk about certainty.
Yeah, and personality types.
Right. Well, there's actually two different elements to this. The first element is the ingrained human need for certainty that everybody has, regardless of their personality type. And then there's the way that uncertainty impacts us as individuals and the kinds of things we're uncertain about based on our personality type. But the reason why I want to talk about this is I think this is actually it's a big node in a lot of systems around why people feel a sense of anxiety, why they may lack a sense of purpose, why they may struggle to take the actions that they should be taking, and why they sometimes take actions they shouldn't be taking. And I think a lot of this, even though obviously anytime you're talking about something so, big, wide open territory such as the actions we take and whether or not we should take them, I obviously there's a lot of nodes in all these systems, but I've recently really gotten on this concept of certainty because I'm starting to understand how the fear around uncertainty, how much our ingrained need to feel certain ends up creating forms of addiction that are really unhealthy for us as individuals. And so as I'm tracing sort of, when I'm working on a problem, unfortunately, it becomes a hammer and all the world's a nail. And it's until I understand that thing and it's as close to what feels like a complete way as possible, and then I move on to the next node. And I think that's a little bit of how, the introverted thinking mind works, especially when it's paired with extroverted intuition. You first zoom out and look at the landscape of what's available, and then you find something interesting and you zoom in on that, and then that becomes the only thing. And right now, this idea of certainty and uncertainty has become my zoom in, and I'm looking at that and understanding how it impacts all the other things around it. So I may end up in this podcast overvaluing this concept of certainty for a moment, but I think it's because I don't really hear a lot of people talking about it as a general rule. And so I think it's been undervalued as a node in a lot of systems. And so I think blowing it up and maybe even creating a little hyperbole around it is appropriate.
Well, I think how I've always thought of it in the past, before I really understood type and started understanding personal growth and even some of the ways that people show up to the world, I thought it was dichotomous. Like there are certain people and there are uncertain people in the world. And you look around and anecdotally, there's kind of evidence for this, right? We watch people take the lead and others follow them. And the people that take the lead have a sense of certainty about them as they move through the world. They're like, I make this decision. We're going this direction. It seems like people that step into leadership, as an example, are very certain of their actions, certain of what needs to be done, certain of the mission they're on in life, whether a business leader, a political leader, a social leader. And other people lack maybe a sense of certainty, say, I want to follow that person or those sets of people because it gives me a sense that I'm on the right track. I feel more certain about my life when I follow this leadership. And I think that's the picture that most of us have about certainty, uncertainty in the outer world, like outside of ourselves. And then obviously, we all have a sense of certainty and uncertainty within ourselves, and we hide that from the world. Like, I don't want the world to know. I don't want other people to know the things I'm uncertain about. I want to hide that. I want to obscure it. I want to keep it private because I feel uncertain. I don't want to feel insecure about those things, and I don't exactly know what's going on in some of those areas. And so when we get into the personal aspect of this, I think we all have something that we're very uncertain about and other things we're very certain about. And what's interesting is I've noticed that I've had to do more work on the things I feel more certain about than even the things I feel more uncertain about, which is an interesting emergent of all this conversation we've been talking about.
Well, and I think our relationship to the concept of certainty and uncertainty actually helps, like on a meta level, just dealing with the concept itself helps us when we're dealing with it in specific ways. And what's interesting about that, I hadn't considered that before, but it's true. We get this idea that people who want to take the lead and who are the first to speak up and who feel very maybe convicted, it feels like those are certain people, right? Like those people have certainty, and that's attractive because a desire for certainty is bred into us. We come out of the hatch. We are born with an intrinsic need to feel certain. And another way of saying certainty or certain is safe. basically. Like the decisions I'm making are the right decisions for me. They have a predictable consequence, or as much of a predictable consequence as possible. It's almost like it's a variation on faith, right? I remember in my old-timey churchy days, having faith to be defined as like an assured expectation of things hoped for, right? Like it's like, I know that this is going to happen. I have a sense of certainty around it. And you can see why faith becomes very attractive to people, because faith gives them a sense of certainty about things that otherwise are there's a lot of uncertainty around them. What happens at death? What is the meaning of life, right? All the big questions, they're all in the realm of total uncertainty. And so to have somebody describe the world or a paradigm or a worldview in very certain terms, all you have to do is trade faith for it. That's really attractive. And so our desire for certainty ends up creating more of an appetite for it to some extent. If we don't stop and go, okay, so what's on the other side of that? What is uncertainty? And is it as bad as my brain is leading me to believe that it is? And I don't think that we necessarily have to let go of a desire for certainty. In fact, I'm not even sure we can, because it is intrinsically, it's like a basic human need for it. But I do think that we can make more peace with uncertainty. And when we do that, now we have a lot more options. The more we need to have certainty, it feeds itself. It's like generative. The more we need to have certainty, the more we seek it, the more we'll claim it, even if we actually aren't authentically feeling it. And then we have to cover over that sense of uncertainty that our unconscious mind is sort of like whispering in our ear, like, you actually don't feel that certain about this thing. And we have to shove that down, go, shut up, mind. I totally feel certain. And then we get into this overcompensating nature, which requires more of a sense of certainty in order to calm that part of us down. And now we're in this almost addictive cycle. And you can see this in really big macro ways and little tiny micro ways. The big macro ways are our worldviews and our paradigms and the certainty we have about us being right about how we see the world, right? And that's most people will claim a sense of certainty that they might not actually feel in the deepest part of them. Like their inner wisdom might not have that same level of certainty that everything else inside of them is claiming it has about how right they are. And you can see this come out in battles, right? And right now at this time period in history, we see more and more of these battles of certainty going back and forth. And it would make sense that we want to feel that way, because the most uncertain elements are the ones that have to do with the major life questions, all the ones that have to do with life and death and the meaning of life and all of those things that end up coloring our moment-to-moment experience. Those are the things we want to feel a high sense of certainty for. So it makes sense that we would grab onto something. My friend Dan recently used the word certaintyism when we were talking, and I was like, yeah, it almost turns into its own ism, this desire for certainty. And you can swap out the worldviews in that place. Like what the worldview isn't as important as the desire to feel certain about it. And so that's like the macro level. And then that bleeds into when we don't have an ability to feel uncertain, when we don't have the space to feel uncertain. Now we bring that into every tiny little decision we make. And anything that causes a sense of hesitation or uncertainty has to be covered over. It's like it has to be compensated for. We have to double down and become more certain than we actually feel, almost like to convince ourselves or convince others that we feel this sense that we always know the right choice to make, that we always know what we're doing here, that the decisions we make or the judgments we have on life, they're going to lead to predictable outcomes and a sense of control in our lives. So that's sort of the overarching concept of certainty and why we tend to become addicted to it, why it tends to turn into an ism for us. Swapping out all of the particulars or the content, the context is that desire, that need to feel like we know what's going on, that we have some predictive abilities to it. And I think anybody who has maybe lost their faith from before or had maybe a really disruptive life circumstance where uncertainty beat them over the head, like with a stick. Like uncertainty could not be, it couldn't be pushed off. It couldn't be denied any longer. You had to sit in a vat of uncertainty until your fingers got pruny with uncertainty. you start to realize that the need to feel certain in and of itself was a trap. Not that we're ever going to get rid of it again, but it becomes addictive. It's a basic human need that can become an addiction, almost like food can. If we have a desire for food because food fuels us, and a desire for certainty keeps us safe. We make better decisions if we're looking for predictive outcomes and more sense of control over the context. So it actually makes it smarter and more savvy in our choices to desire a sense of certainty. But if we become addicted to food, well, then we're overfeeding ourselves. We're getting too much of a good thing. And then eventually our bodies will show that, right? And we'll get the consequences of it. And suddenly our joints are hurting. Now we are sluggish. Now we can't do the things we could do before, right? Like now our bodies are showing that the addiction to this thing that in and of itself isn't bad is a problem. It's the relationship to the thing. And I think the same thing happens with certainty. Like it's okay to desire it. It's actually good and healthy for us to want it. But when we can't go without it, when we have to have it all the time, in every tiny little decision we make, we have to convince ourselves that we feel this high level of certainty. Now the relationship to certainty is the problem. We're addicted to it and we can't let it go. And just like if we have an addiction to something like food, everything inside of us is saying, don't do that. That's not going to turn out well. This is not a direction we really want to be going. But we shut all of those voices down because we love the hit we're getting from the experience. It's the same thing with certainty. Everything inside us tells us that we do probably need to be making more space for a sense of uncertainty, that this level of certainty isn't real. It's not authentic. It's not going down to the marrow of our bones. It's a cover, right? It's gilded. And that relationship to certainty is going to cause a lot of problems. And I think one of the best ways, or one of the first ways you can see this, is in relationships. When we become addicted to certainty, it means that we always know what's right. We always know what people should be thinking and doing. And when they're not doing that, it threatens our sense of certainty around what we believe. And now we have to go on the attack. What it is we have to defend our sense of certainty. And so it puts us in a perpetual defensive state against the world. And that's why it causes us to take actions we shouldn't and then prevents us from taking actions that we should. And I really got onto this concept probably within the last 6 months. And it ended up sneaking its way into our personality types and emotional tools for survival. I can't remember exactly what we called it, but the program we recently put on about emotional tools and how personality type relates to stress. So I did this research project around the concept of stress, and I discovered that there's actually two different kinds of stress. There's something called eustress, which is healthy stress, and distress, which is unhealthy stress. And at the end of the day, the difference between these two is that when we go through a eustress situation, which almost looks identical to distress, except that it dumps different chemicals into us, different basically hormones into us, and it gives us an opportunity to learn through the experience. So eustress dumps a bunch of norepinephrine, which I've recently learned from my friend Will, it's basically adrenaline, but it's adrenaline in the head. Whereas distress dumps adrenaline and cortisol into our body. And the difference between these two experiences of adrenaline and cortisol for distress and norepinephrine for eustress is that when we go through a eustress experience, we can take the lessons from it. We can learn through that experience. It's still a heightened state. We're still feeling all the same, like, oh, am I going to make it through this? Kind of like the best example of this would be a roller coaster. When you go on a roller coaster, everything inside you says, I'm taking my life in my hands, even though you're not. Nobody's ever died on this thing. It's as safe as something can be. It was more unsafe to drive to the roller coaster than it was to get on the roller coaster. And it creates a eustress situation because you know you're actually going to be safe, but it still gives you all the sensations of something that would be dangerous. And that's a eustress situation. It creates a sensation of a high and low that puts your body through something. But at the end of all of it, you can reflect back and take lessons and learn from it. Whereas distress puts you in a survival space. It's flight, fight, or freeze, and whatever else comes with that. And so because all of the adrenaline and cortisol is getting dumped into the body, it's not really there to take lessons. It's just there to get through the experience. And on the other side, you can't take lessons from it. So when I was looking at all of this around stress, one of the big things that causes stress and distress is uncertainty. It's one of the biggest causes of distress is the sense of like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through this situation. I don't know how much control I have over it. I don't know if I'm going to survive it. And in the modern world, or in this contemporary world, most of the things that make us feel distress are things that are actually not threatening our physical bodies, right? We're going to survive through it just fine. Now, whether or not we take lessons through it is associated with how much eustress we have allowed ourselves to go through so that we have built up muscle to be able to deal with the concept of stress at all. Meaning that as we build our muscles, basically our psychic muscles, to be able to deal with the challenges of the world, if we put ourselves through enough eustress situations, which is basically putting ourselves in stressful situations intentionally in order to learn and grow from them, the more we've done that, the more we're able to deal with distress, because it's very similar muscles, right? You go, oh, I've seen this before. My body knows what this feels like. I can get through this. I've watched myself do it a million times before. And as we do that, we also build our muscles for dealing with uncertainty. So really the antidote to this idea of being addicted to certainty versus having space for uncertainty is how many challenges have we put ourselves through intentionally and willingly to be able to deal with situations where we are not sure what the outcome is going to be, but we're going to trust ourselves through the experience. We're going to put ourselves in something that creates a heightened experience. And on the other side, we're going to take account of it and go, I got through that. That was actually okay. I felt very uncertain in the beginning, but here I am, and I survived it, and it was okay. And those are basically psychic muscles. Those are the muscles we use to survive life, basically, and thrive through it. Like this is the workout regime that we put our minds through, just like we hit the gym every week for our bodies. And so this is something that really stuck with me. This idea of uncertainty being associated with, with basically our willingness to go take risks and take chances. And of course that makes sense, right? The more you're willing to put yourself in an uncertain situation, the more you're going to learn from uncertainty and make peace with it and be okay with it. And it seems like it's one of those basic tools for emotional survival, is being able to make peace with uncertainty.
All right, so you're talking a lot of abstract terms, Antonia. Let me bring this back down to maybe some tangible access points here. I'll start by just talking about this idea of certainty and uncertainty. I think it's getting worse as a general condition or challenge for us as humans. As we move from a modernist world where there's singular narratives, religious and social and political narratives that are very basic and overarching, into a postmodern space where those narratives break down. Everybody gets to be the writer of their own narrative, their own story. It creates a lot more uncertainty in our world because we're not going to tap ourselves into this meta-narrative anymore. We get to decide for ourselves which one of the multiple narratives we want to pick up. It's kind of like, my parents talk about when they grew up as children, they had 3 television channels here in the United States they could watch, and they could choose between the 3 of those. Well, almost imagine modernism is the same. You have 3 maybe overarching, paradigmatic, broad brush narratives that you can choose from maybe. I mean, there's more than that, but just for a thought exercise, just put it down to a few basic quote-unquote channels of life you can tune to. Well, now in a postmodern world, we have endless cable channels. We have endless streaming channels. We have YouTube channels. There's unlimited amount of content that you can access. So in a metaphor of this is postmodern, right? This is how we're moving through the world. You can literally choose any which direction you want. And I think it creates a lot of uncertainty in us as humans to go, well, how do I know I'm choosing well? How do I know which narrative and meaning to apply to my life is going to give me satisfaction? It's going to give me happiness. And then maybe even start applying one and you're like, oh, that one over there looks even better, newer and shinier. And so you jump track and go toward that one. And then you find yourself over years jumping from one thing to the next, feeling very uncertain about what you're doing. And you're losing yourself to every new social movement, every new content platform, every new idea or ideology or new way of seeing or new technology. I mean, some people just go from technology to technology. And I think this is it's an addiction, like you said, but it's also a chasing of something that has some stability, some ballast. And the other thing that makes this challenging is it happens in so much abstraction, right? We're not talking about an agrarian culture or even an industrial culture anymore. We're in a knowledge work and creative culture where there's a lot of abstract work happening, like, for example, in our day-to-day lives. Like a lot of people work in knowledge work fields where the work they're doing isn't like with their hands, digging in dirt physically. So the abstract nature, the breaking apart of narrative structures, it feels like we're just swimming in this postmodern, uncertain sea of endless options. And so this paradox of choice comes in too. And so what in that worldview, or in that situation, what happens is we end up arguing about worldviews. We feel uncertain. Do I have the right way of seeing this? No, I absolutely do, because it's so obvious to me and how I see the world. And now we have got these battles of, well, I'm seeing that over there as red, and no, I'm seeing that's blue. We can't even agree with what we're seeing together because we're all living these split apart postmodern narratives. And then even more uncertainty because we can't get people to have consensus agreement with us. Now I feel alone in that I see that's a red apple. You're saying it's a green apple. How are we supposed to get along? And I feel even more uncertain now because people around me aren't confirming the reality I'm seeing.
Yeah.
So I just want to bring attention to this, that I think it's escalating and it's becoming more and more of a challenge. And I think that's one of the reasons why we see personality types, for example, as a ballast of a sense of moving through the world, because it helps us have an access point for our identity of who we are. Maybe we can't know which channel to tune to, quote unquote, metaphorically speaking, but we can get a sense of who we are in the midst of all these endless options, because our identity is somewhat of a sense of, like, we have a sense of it internally to ourselves. We have a sense of who we are and how we're wired and how we show up to the world. And if we could focus on that, well, then all these endless options are just outside of us. We are the consistency that we bring into our worldview. We can create a sense of certainty within ourselves. Now, based on your personality type, though, there's different parts of yourself you're probably going to have certainty and uncertainty about, right? Because how we're wired, we're going to have, like, for example, I'm a feeler in the Myers-Briggs system. I use the process introverted feeling. We call it authenticity here at Personality Hacker. I have a lot of certainty in how I show up, understanding my own motivations, the motivations of others, core values, things that resonate with me as a person. And I move through the world with a lot of certainty in that. Maybe somebody else that doesn't have that function in their car model or cognitive function stack, or it's lower down, or it's not as accessible for them, maybe they have a lot of uncertainty in that area of their life. So I think if we look at it from the personality type lens, we can start to maybe create on-ramps and things we can feel certain about inside of our personality as we move forward that can really help us.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that we're our own through line through life. Like, the one thing I'm certain about is that I'm having an experience right now. Like, that's one of the only things I can really feel truly certain about. You were talking about how people jump around and grab onto the next thing to give themselves a sense of certainty in an uncertain world. And I think the other side of this is holding on too tightly.
Absolutely.
It's not being willing to change, even if more information is presented. And so really what it is it doesn't matter how it manifests. It's all rooted as a fleeing, a running away from a sense of uncertainty. And so what you just mentioned, Joel, about our personality types, what I'm starting to realize is that if we have this problem or challenge, if we are so, we just push away the sense of uncertainty, we can use our own personality type as a laboratory to build that muscle. You know, we talked about the eustress, the willingness to put ourselves in stressful situations so that we can learn lessons from them and rest into a sense of uncertainty more and more. We can use our personality type and the construction of it and the cognitive function wiring of our type in order to turn it into a laboratory, to teach ourselves little lessons every day to make peace, more and more peace with this idea of uncertainty. And you just mentioned something, which is that as an ENFP, you use introverted feeling, or what we call authenticity, as your auxiliary or co-pilot function, co-pilot in the car model. And so you're going to have a higher sense of certainty around anything that lives in that in that space, right, in that terrain. And it's because you and I have realized, and we've tried to describe our relationship to our driver, co-pilot, 10-year-old or 3-year-old, or in technical terms, dominant, auxiliary, tertiary, and inferior. We've talked about a million different ways to describe our relationship to those functions. But the word that just struck me as being almost at the nucleus of it all is the word certainty. And the higher up a function is in our stack, or the higher up it is in our car model, the more certainty we have in it. And the further down it goes, the more uncertainty we have. And this is one of the reasons why we all have a mixed bag of our relationship to these functions, because we all have a different relationship to the concept of uncertainty itself. It's also diagnoses why we do some weird things with those functions when we're trying to overcompensate for that sense of uncertainty.
I'll just say the notion that there's certainty, the higher up it is in the stack or the further up in the car model resonates deeply. And I'm sure you listening, this resonates with you. I'm an ENFP in the Myers-Briggs system. My dominant or driver cognitive function is extroverted intuition, and we've nicknamed it exploration. I feel so much certainty with this. It would be near impossible for someone to get me to doubt myself when I'm using this function or in this space. I mean, maybe that it's possible, but the probabilities are so low, and the person would have to really challenge this aspect of me because I move through the world probably with a little too much certainty. I feel like I can go ahead and explore things, maybe break systems. Oh, we can fix that in post. This idea of moving through the world. If someone said, you're not very good at extrovert intuition or exploration, I'd be like, okay, whatever you're talking about. Yeah, I mean, it probably wouldn't even register for me to be offended by it because I just can't even accept that as criticism. I know it's not true. My experience proves to me it's not true. Everything I see through the world using that function, I'm doing it well. I'm one of the best at it of all the types. ENTPs would be the other type that's really good at this too. And I would say that they probably, just like you, Antonia, as ENTP, you probably can't really have that threatened for you. And so whatever your driver or dominant is, as you're listening along, if I came to you and started to say to you, oh, you're no good at this process, you might just be like, okay. You wouldn't even be upset by it, most likely. You'd be like, yeah, whatever Joel's talking about, and you just walk on and keep going with your life.
Yeah.
Now, contrast that with something maybe your 3-year-old or inferior cognitive function. Now game on. Right? You talk to me about my introverted sensing or memory process, I'm going to be there oh, maybe they're right. Maybe I don't know what I'm doing here. I have a lot of uncertainty
they are right.
there. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they are right. That's exactly what I'd say. They are right. Oh, man, I'm terrible at this. I try to obscure it or hide it or overcompensate for it or whatever because that's something I definitely have a lot of uncertainty in.
Yeah, that dominant or driver function. I mean, you said describe the function, but it's now think of all the ways or the territory that particular function takes in. And, if you're an EFJ and somebody's like, you're really terrible at managing people or relationships, you're just going to be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, okay.
Right, exactly.
Whatever.
Or if you're extroverted sensing or sensation, it's you don't have the ability to be present, or you're not bold enough, or you don't explore the world enough, or whatever. It's the person's gonna be like, what are you talking about? I move through the world and experience it and am present all the time. So there's an inability to basically insult our dominant function, and it's because of our level of certainty. And I would actually argue that our relationship with that, John Beebe calls it the hero function. We are over certain in our dominant or driver. Yeah. There's a sense of certainty that isn't appropriate sometimes. Like I mentioned with, EFJ types, extroverted feeling or harmony is their driver or dominant function. That idea of I'm not good with people is ridiculous, to a point where sometimes EFJs will not take an accounting of how much they're hurting a relationship because they're overconfident in their ability to repair it, right? And the same thing with extroverted intuition or exploration like we have. Sometimes we will under-prepare for something. We'll enter a situation. ESPs do this too, where we under-prepare for a situation because we are so over-reliant on our ability to navigate through at the last minute, right? To be able to sort of, improvise our way through. And so we can have a sense of overconfidence in that part of who we are because our sense of certainty is so high. And then you go down the functions. Our auxiliary function is less certain than our dominant, but we still have a sense of certainty around it. And in fact, sometimes we have to gain a sense of humility about what we still need to learn in that function. When I was not using very much introverted thinking or accuracy as my co-pilot or auxiliary function when I was younger, I hadn't really been taught how to do it. I still always thought that I saw things right and I had this pristine sense of logic. I was always thinking things through and making sense of them. I just didn't know how poor I was at executing that skill, but I still had a sense of certainty around it. It wasn't until I learned, there's a lot to take in with introverted thinking or accuracy. There's a lot to learn, a lot of principles, core principles to really nail down, a lot of models and systems to understand. And then at this point, I don't have as high a sense of certainty as I do about my dominant or driver, but I still feel a sense of confidence in myself. And the better I get at it and the more I watch myself get good at it, the more it it thrills me to use it. It's like an exhilarating function. I love it. I love focusing. I love thinking things through. I love articulating and expressing and filleting stuff out. It's just it's a pleasure and a joy for me. And I do have a higher sense of certainty, but it doesn't come anywhere close to my driver or dominant.
We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show.
Now, when we get to the back seat of the car and we look at like our tertiary or 10-year-old function, you can really see where uncertainty starts to peek its head up. And we're going to feel, that relationship with that tertiary 10-year-old is so fascinating because on one side, we have, I would argue, a 10-year-old sense of confidence around it, meaning that we don't know what we don't know yet. We don't know how much there is to understand about this function. It's a very humbling experience to hang out with somebody who has it as their dominant or driver, your 10-year-old or tertiary for a while, and see how it's really done. And you're like, oh, okay. Now I understand what that's capable of. But until we have those moments, we're always, as a 10-year-old, it's like we're signaling all the time. We're trying to get the outside world to reflect back to us that we're actually really good at this because we think we might be good at it in the way that a 10-year-old thinks they might be good at something. But then we get these moments where it's reflected back that we're not as good as we thought we were, and then that gives us a sense of uncertainty. So then we can make one of two choices. We can either go down the overcompensating road, where the sense of uncertainty around this function is distressing to us. We don't like it. We hate it. And so then now we have to signal more. We have to double down on our ability to be good at it more. And we have to reflect back to ourselves that there's no reason to feel uncertain here. And sometimes when we do that, we get caught in a loop, right? Like we put too much importance on this part of who we are. And in part, it's because we're running away from the uncertainty it makes us feel. We give it too much attention because we're trying to puff it up. We're trying to pretend that it's, we're giving it a bunch of participation awards, basically, and trying to make it feel really good about itself because we don't like how uncertain it can feel when it's destabilized. That's one road. Or the other road we can go down is a road of uncertainty. It's a road of recognizing that we're not as good at this as maybe we wish we were, that it's something that flavors us, that's a big part of who we are and important. And it can give us a lot of gifts, particularly if we're using it in concert with our co-pilot or auxiliary function. It is a part of us that feels some certainty in some ways because it has observed itself do good things. And so there's a valid reason to feel a sense of restedness there as long as the context is manageable, as long as we don't bite off more than we can chew here, or we don't get immodest about where we're at. My extroverted feeling or harmony it helps me be more charismatic in public. It helps me really tie into and connect with other people. But it certainly doesn't help me throw parties, right? Like it doesn't help me do big context things with it and manage lots and lots of human interactions and be okay in a huge group of people. Like it's not really feeling very much certainty there. But if it's smaller and manageable and more one-to-one, I have a lot more ability to rest into it. And so making peace with that sense of uncertainty that lives there has allowed me to know just what kind of decision should I be making here? Just how much of this should I be challenging myself with? Should I be doing things that over-honor it because I'm trying to prove to myself that I'm better at it than I actually am? Or should I have a sense of modesty around there and recognize that sometimes I'm just going to not know the right way of going about things? Maybe I should ask for help, or maybe I should let other people know that I'm just unsure. And then when I make mistakes there, I can own them and recognize it. And it gives me sort of an overall, it puts me in a more humble, modest place, I think, when I make peace with that. But I also can take that general sense of uncertainty and bring it to the rest of the world, knowing that uncertainty is inevitable, that the same uncertainty that I'm experiencing there, combined with a little bit of confidence and certainty, is something I can bring to other areas of my life, meaning that I can bring myself into challenges that are good from my level, right? Challenge myself at my level in whatever that thing is, not knowing if I'm going to succeed. And if I get to that place of not succeeding, if I fail the first time through, I can make peace with that because I didn't know what the outcome was going to be anyway. And that's okay, right? Like, it doesn't mean anything about who I am as a person, since uncertainty is inevitable.
So I think the 10-year-old tertiary process for you listening might be a great access point. I think this is what Antonia and I have been awakened to in our lives, is to say, where am I overcompensating? Where am I showing up feeling a little uncertain about this, maybe unconsciously, that I'm overdoing it? I'm trying to strive and prove to myself and others that I'm really good at the talents and skills and things with this function. And I just want to make a comment to that too, just to reiterate. You may have lots of skill. We all may have developed skill in our 10-year-old or tertiary, or even our 3-year-old or inferior process. Maybe your work context, your family context has you focused on this, and you've had to develop it in a way that's very usable. And it doesn't mean that you don't have skill there just because you feel uncertain. And just because you feel uncertain doesn't mean you don't have skill there. It's that sense of, like, it's almost like you can never develop it enough. You can never exercise it enough. You'll always have this little nagging voice in your head that goes, it's just not good enough yet. Just more. You've got to keep working at it. And so this almost compulsion to prove to ourselves and others that we're okay with this. So just maybe ask yourself, like, where am I attempting to prove this to myself or others? Overextending it, trying to show the outer world or even myself that not only do I have skill here, but I've got a sense of myself here. I've got certainty here. And just, I think that's an access point just to get a sense of how this is showing up in your life that might be undermining the natural ways which you do feel certain in maybe the front seat passengers of your car model cognitive functions, your driver or dominant or your co-pilot auxiliary. Those are areas that you can develop a lot of certainty around and have a lot of, you already have it in your driver or dominant, but you can develop a lot of it in your co-pilot or auxiliary function. And so focusing on that is fantastic. And then that 10-year-old or tertiary can serve the co-pilot auxiliary function and support its sense of certainty. John Beebe talks about it as the parent function, our co-pilot auxiliary. And there's a sense of it parenting the rest of our personality, helping us know how to move through the world, self-parenting us, and helping that 10-year-old or tertiary support us in really positive ways. And it can rest into the certainty of that auxiliary or co-pilot and not have to have the burden of it for itself.
I love the word burden. When we put too much pressure on that 10-year-old or tertiary, we overburden it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we put the metaphor I recently heard is we put too many clothes in the laundry, in the washer. And that 10-year-old or tertiary function in its overcompensating time periods will do that intentionally to itself because it's trying to prove something without having the sophistication to know, no, that's too much. Like that's too much clothes. You're going to break the washer. And so it's really a matter of helping create more balance. And when we are fleeing a feeling of uncertainty, we're more likely to do the behaviors that put too many clothes in the washer. We're more likely to try to be proving something, as you mentioned. And eventually it breaks the psyche, right? Like it's just too much. It was never intended to have that much burden on it. So the 3-year-old or inferior function, now we're at a place of the highest levels of uncertainty. And I would argue that this is the biggest place of uncertainty, even more than, like, say, the shadow functions of 5 through 8, because this is such a part of who we are. We're so identified with it.
We have so much aspiration here, right? But without a lot of certainty of what that even means for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's like it's so influential, and it's such an important thing to integrate into our lives. And we know that. Like, there's a part of us that recognizes the importance of integration. But it's also a place of deep uncertainty, high uncertainty, like the level of uncertainty that a 3-year-old feels about walking into the world. Like they don't leave or walk very far away from mom and dad. A 3-year-old doesn't. Because as soon as they feel whatever is that sort of psychic tether that you have to your parents, as soon as that distance gets too wide, It's like the 3-year-old automatically knows that it has ventured way further than it should have, and now it swoops its head back and looks for its parents frantically because it doesn't have any sense of certainty in the world. And so you'll see this with certain personality types that really work hard at trying to develop that 3-year-old or inferior function. They work hard to overcompensate for it being sort of a natural blind spot or natural weakness. And we talked about a million times before, the only reason why that's the case is because we're spending more time on its polarity opposite, the dominant or driver. And it's a cost of specialization. When we pour all of our time and attention into the opposite, we're not going to have as much space to pour into that 3-year-old or inferior. But now we have this part of us that's important, compelling, whispering in our ears, is an aspiration, is something that's, deeply influential, and also a space of extraordinary uncertainty. So some people will pour a ton of time and resource into trying to overcome that sense. Going back to EFJs, I know EFJs that have like 2 or 3 PhDs because they hate that sense of uncertainty around their introverted thinking or accuracy there. And I know some ETJs that are absolutely dedicated to all these causes and all these, different things that are really important to them. And a part of it is because they are uncomfortable with the uncertainty they feel in that part of who they are. Am I a good or a bad person? Am I somebody who is giving back? Like, who am I? And so not to say, that the 3 PhDs and the activist causes, these are all not good, not bad things. Like, they're great, they're fine. But a part of it is desiring to feel more of a sense of certainty, and that just never goes away. The sense of uncertainty is not going anywhere. So we can either overcompensate by trying to build that part of us bigger and bigger and bigger, which means, of course, we'll be robbing from our dominant or driver when we do that, by the way. Anytime we are focusing on that part of who we are, we're taking a little bit from the part of us that feels generative with energy. So it's a bargain we have to make. But the challenge is that it doesn't solve the original problem, which is a feeling, that feeling of uncertainty. That actually never goes away, no matter how good we get at it. So again, we can take one of two paths. We can take the path I just described, which is that overcompensating nature, pouring a ton into it, trying to feel like we have some sense of ourselves and confidence in this place. Or we can go down the path of making peace with uncertainty. We can hold that space for ourselves. We can be okay with not knowing how it's going to pan out, whether or not we have what it takes. And oftentimes we do. Oftentimes in those situations where this feels like it would be the right tool for the job, and oh my gosh, I'm not good at this and this is going to be terrible. And I enter a space where I feel really underprepared, or I feel like I'm just not going to get through this. This is not my wheelhouse. We get to the other side and we were fine. And maybe we didn't do it elegantly. Maybe we tripped our way through the situation, but we got to the other side and it was okay. And we have to, I think a gift we can give to ourselves is allowing ourselves to build the muscle of making peace with uncertainty, not having all experiences of uncertainty be distress, have some of those experiences be eustress. And when we do that, now we have the capacity to actually integrate that part of who we are. So I think sometimes we think that integration of the other side of the polarity, meaning that integrating our 3-year-old or our inferior into our driver or dominant, means working on it. But I've heard from many, many people in the type world that are also aligned with spirituality. I've heard Dario Nardi say this. I've heard John Beebe say this. I've heard it from multiple trusted sources that integration doesn't necessarily mean working on something. Integration means giving it space to be what it is, allowing it to be whatever it is at the time that it is. So like you're an ITP and your extroverted feeling or harmony has a need for connection. It has a need for friendships and connection, but you feel unqualified to go find those friends and connect, or you don't want to burden them with your problems, or you don't want to tell them what's really going on because, you can't not be the expert in this situation, or you can't show up with ever looking like you are not completely competent or capable, right? Because that's a big part of introverted thinking or accuracy as a dominant driver, is feeling competent and capable, feeling like an expert, feeling like you have enough information to be able to go it on your own, right? Navigate your way through the situation. And you have this desire or need, but you're not giving it to yourself because you feel like you have to get better at that. You have to grow that part of you. And that's, of course, influenced by your introverted thinking or accuracy, telling you have to be an expert at everything. But if you just give yourself space to be in that function, you just allow yourself to have the need of human connection. You just go, hey, I'm not doing well. I need friends, right? And you go talk to your friends, and you go ahead and allow yourself to burden, quote unquote, burden them, which is not really a burden. It's the load of friendship, right? It's like, that's what friendship is. Friendship is, I take on your troubles sometimes and you take on my troubles sometimes. And people who have extroverted feeling or harmony as a driver or dominant know this very well. So it's giving it space to be inelegant, but still there and represented. And the more we do that, the more now we can integrate it into the driver or dominant. Now the driver or dominant, in the case I'm talking about with ITPs, now they have a lot more information about how relationships work in general and how they can show up for other people better because they now have the experience of having other people show up for them. And now they have more information around how friendships work and how this whole thing, how this dynamic works. And it's not just conceptual. It's not just information that was read someplace. It's information that was experienced. And so now it's an integration, and now it's a much richer part of an aspiration of getting people's needs met, because you've actually experienced having your needs met by others in a time period where it was hard for you to do that. And so it just gives a person a lot more of a fleshed out experience. And you could go through all of the types and talk about how just giving it space to be whatever it is in that moment, as uncertain as it is a huge part of integrating it into your driver or dominant, or really, I would say, integrating it into your life and having it become something that really, like gives you texture as a person, keeps you from being one-sided, allows you to be more of what you naturally are, not an expert at all these things, not amazing at all these things, but just whatever it is, whenever it is, wherever you're at in that moment in the timeline. And so making peace with uncertainty in our personality type gives us an ability to make peace with uncertainty in general. And making peace with uncertainty in general gives us a much easier time of navigating the world without feeling almost constant distress. Almost a sense that, man, I have to show up knowing everything, or knowing my place, or knowing what the right answer is, or knowing what my next step is, or knowing how to deal with relationships, or whatever it is. It gives us an opportunity to enter the world with a little bit of like, okay, well, I guess I'll see where this goes, right? A little bit of flexibility, a little bit of, I'll see how I operate and work, and on the other side, take an accounting of it all and watch myself overcome obstacles and watch myself navigate through all this and see what happens. And now I'm not so grabby. Now I'm not a certaintist, right? Now it's not an ism or a certaintyist. Now it's just me living life and doing it in a way where I'm thriving, not always beating myself up for not having done well enough.
So I think as we start to wrap up this conversation, the takeaways that I believe are emerging is that it's not that one personality type or certain personality types are more certain than others. It's that, what are we more certain about? Now, you're talking, Antonia, about this idea of be okay with uncertainty in general. I think there are personality types that are more okay with uncertainty of what's coming next. Like you and I, as EP types, I think are a little bit more open maybe than an IJ type, where they're looking to, protect vulnerabilities and ensure they can know what's coming down the road to manage their energy. As an example, just a contrasting, viewpoint between EPs and IJs. There is a sense of IJs would like a little more certainty of what's coming so they can manage the energy to get there. Whereas you and I have a sense of, well, we can just generate the energy when it's needed. So when you're zoomed out to say, well, what's coming down the road, we feel more certain about, it's not that we feel more certain about what's coming down the road. It's that we feel more certain about the energy we might need to generate in the moment it's required of us.
Right.
And so it's a little more nuanced than like judgers need certainty of what's coming next and perceivers don't. It's qualitatively different in what we're looking for. And I just want to bring attention to that, because it'd be very easy to overgeneralize this or just broad brush this in a way, probably to feel certain about the understanding around it, if you want to go real meta on it. But I think that's just something we want to pay attention to, is it's there's a quality to it that's leading to these conclusions or these viewpoints we have as different personality types. So that's just the first comment. And then the second one is, how do we access this? Like, what's the access point for us? So for example, right now, currently in my life, I have a lot of uncertainty in my introverted sensing memory process. It's my 3-year-old process, Inferior. And, we're running a business. I have to do so many things running a business that puts me into the place of this function. I have to keep track of things like taxes and paperwork and contracts. Now, we have a good team that we've developed here to help us do some of those things, but there's still things I just can't get out of. I have to do on my own.
Well, and learning the right lessons from the past.
That's
I would
right.
say one of the biggest senses of uncertainty that I have is we've been running this business for a decade. Did we take the right lessons from everything we experienced?
Yeah. And so I have a lot of uncertainty there. So one thing I've done is I actually have overcompensated a lot. Like, I can't tell you how many times I'm in a team meeting where I'm like, I'm just terrible at this. This is my terrible inferior 3-year-old introverted sensing memory. I'm helpless. And I start saying that out loud. I'm only reinforcing the sense of uncertainty myself. So one of the things I'm personally working on in my life is to go, okay, I've recognized my uncertainty in some of the overcompensating parts of this, but I don't want to go the other side now and just like be helplessly treading water or flailing, almost drowning in this place. I need to have a sense of, no, there's some aspirational elements. There's some things I can improve. There's some skill I can build. So I think there's a balance here of not just surrendering to this and doing, well, it's just the most uncertain part of me. No, it is an uncertain part of me, but it doesn't mean I just surrender to that and then just like externalize it and then always call it all the time. So that's one of the things I'm personally working on. And I think it would be interesting for you listening to just kind of get a sense of where are you at with your relationship to these two backseat functions, your 10-year-old tertiary or your 3-year-old inferior. Are you having overcompensating behavior? Do you have things more simplified, like black and white thinking in these areas because it makes it more simple, so it gives you a sense of certainty? Are you doing what I'm doing? I'm like going meta on my ego to try to cover my ego. I'm calling out my own ego. It's like this weird like attempt to salve how insecure I feel about this by talking about how insecure I feel about this. So where are you at in those pendulums? Like how far on one side or the other are you? And I think just getting a sense of where you're showing up with your backseat functions can give you access to these to begin to work on what do you need to do. Like for me, I need to pull back on that. Maybe you need to amp it up and go ahead and surrender and say, I am uncertain about this.
Wow, what great points. I'm so glad you said all of that because I think that got lost in translation. And I think it's so important to indicate that it's not just about what's coming in the future. It's about what we're experiencing and the kinds of things that come at us that make us feel uncertain as different personality types. Like I don't feel a sense of certainty when I'm talking about leadership at all. I don't feel any sense of certainty about that, but I feel high senses of certainty about self-leadership. And so it's definitely from type to type. And the idea of looking at your car model and then asking yourself what's your relationship with certainty in each of these positions, and particularly in that 10-year-old tertiary or 3-year-old inferior, and how you're dealing with your sense of uncertainty around those functions. Are you burdening them? Are you overcompensating? Are you letting go and just being like, well, I guess this is not my thing, right? I think that's brilliant. I'm so glad you mentioned all of that. I think for me, with my introverted sensing memory, 3-year-old inferior function, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make peace with the fact that my routines and rituals will be disrupted on a regular basis. That I don't have any sense of certainty around my ability to just sort of lock them in as the routines that I'm going to have in my life and then know that they're set. I've kind of made peace with the fact that they're going to be inevitably disrupted. And it's going to take a while for me to find my way back to them. And then I'm going to find my way back to them. And then when I find my way back to them, they're going to get disrupted again. And that's just a dance. I think before, when I knew that was going to happen, it made me feel such a sense of unease, I wouldn't even attempt it to begin with. But now I've made peace with it being part of the rhythm. The rhythm is set, disrupt, find way back, set, disrupt, find way back. And I'm never going to be any better than that, I think. I don't know, maybe I will, but I don't have any certainty around that. I'm very uncertain about my ability to get better at that. And still, I'm making space for it. I'm making space for the routine to exist at all. And I'm trying to rest into that, right? I'm trying to not just kind of throw my hands up and go, I guess this is never going to work. I'm just going, okay, this is part of the rhythm. And I don't know when the disruption will come. I don't know when that's going to happen. I'm very uncertain about the whens of that. And its inevitability, though, that's something I've made peace with. And I think I'm better off for it. I think I'm better off for trying to get these routines in, even if they're going to be disrupted, for at least the attempt. And I get a lot more done. Man, I'm getting so much more done because I'm making that space. So thank you for mentioning all that, Joel. I think that was brilliantly said, and I think it's really important.
So where do you feel uncertain in your personality? You've been listening along. What's coming up for you? Where do you feel very certain? What parts of you do you feel like you want to work on this? What are the access points? Like, where are you maybe overcompensating? Where are you undervaluing? Where are you just locking things into very black and white thinking and oversimplifying? Some of these questions can help unlock some of the parts of you that feel certain or uncertain. And then as you ask yourself this, come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. We'd love to hear what's unlocking for you in your self-understanding. What are you noticing about yourself and how you show up? We'd love to have you come over, ask a question, make a comment, or more importantly, share your story over at personalityhacker.com.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave us a rating and review on iTunes, it helps me spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically out. So go do it, because it's been a while since I think we've had a really good review. We get ratings a lot, but if you leave a review, it's delicious. It's the spice of it all. So if you would do that, that would be awesome. We also have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. We have a series of, it's a 3-part program that we called Tools for Emotional Survival. It's personality types and our emotional tools that we take through our life. The first one is based on stress. The second one is based on self-care. And the third one was based on optimism. And we take our personality type and break it down and understand how things like loops and grips, our relationship with our intuition, our relationship with our experiences in the outside world, and our relationship to our inner world, how all of that impacts our ability to navigate through life elegantly and build all the psychic muscles we need to build to be able to survive an uncertain world. So we highly recommend you go check it out. It's personalityhacker.com. If you look under our suite of programs, our catalog, you'll find the Tools for Emotional Survival programs and a lot of other programs that are personal growth oriented through the lens of personality type. So go check those out, all of them, and see if there's one that's right for you.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning. We are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.